Welcome back. What problem are you solving? Yes, we are. We are better than the average, the industry average of podcasts that only lasts about 4 or 5 episodes. So we're either there or almost there. But consistency is
That's
key.
real?
So it is
That's
that is
real?
real. Yeah,
Oh,
it's like
snap.
99.99% of podcasts don't make it past like their third or fourth episode.
Oh, wow.
They're
Okay.
published, but here we are. Going to break the record. So let's go to one sentence bio, starting with Adam. Let's do it again. One sentence biography.
Where's Wendy? That's my biography.
That's the special guest.
This-
Come on. This is why we can't have nice things.
Hi, my one sentence bio is that I ruin surprises.
Yes, you did. I love it.
My name is Adam Burke, and I help people test their assumptions.
Nice. Ty.
My name is Ty Smith, and I like to create generational impact.
Ooh. I like that too. That's good. And one sentence bio for me, recovering engineer and bureaucracy hacker. And since Adam loves to spoil surprises, surprise guest for tonight, Wendy Muse. What is your one sentence bio?
I'm a behind the scenes kind of gal, so that's probably my one sentence bio. Wendy Muse. I am an entrepreneur. I love everything related to entrepreneurship. I like helping people figure out their way through that journey so that they can iterate rather than give up and go back into the horrible nature of corporate work.
Wendy, did you say entrepreneur?
I sure did.
Wow, I love it.
You need to trademark that ASAP.
I told you that's what I had to.
All right,
That's
Adam,
cool.
you're
redeemed.
Thank you very much.
Now,
For now.
That's all,
We're only 2 minutes in.
that's all I needed to hear.
so Wendy, if you hadn't
So-
figured out, there's three
I-
chuckleheads that just like to be goofy.
Oh, that's all right.
I forgive you. I
Yeah.
forgive you both.
You're too kind.
Okay.
You really are. Thank you.
His kindness
Uh,
knows no bounds.
Ah, there you go. Love it.
And
You get along just fine here, Wendy. Just fine.
My real one sentence bio was Wendy's intern when it comes to helping startups, but I had already ruined the surprise. Wendy, were you able to watch that live, or
Yeah, I can see it.
we now know about that it's our fourth that this stuff 45 minutes hits quicker than we all realize. John's got quite a
Dude, we didn't start on time. Adam's taking me off script. Like, I'm just falling apart over here. So what are we talking about tonight? We are talking about assumptions versus hypotheses. So, we talked a little bit about build, measure, learn in previous episodes. We talked about MVPs, and tonight let's just hone in a little bit. Why do we care? So that's the real big question. Why do we care about assumptions or hypotheses in a lean startup kind of model instead of just picking a plan and going for it? Wendy, what are your thoughts on that?
I literally said this earlier today on a chat with Adam. I think for lots of entrepreneurs, an important lesson to learn early is that hope is not a strategy. And so testing your hypothesis so that you can actually be sure that you're right rather than assuming you are is such an essential way to get traction faster, which is what most entrepreneurs or startups are looking for. They're looking for that sort of hit the runway and start getting traction versus hit the runway and start sliding off the end of that.
So I got a question for you. Okay, so I'm gonna jump right in, Wendy. All right, so
Yep.
I'm like the egghead of the group, right? John is like the engineer. Adam. Just messing with
It's a
you.
catalyst.
Yeah, he's the catalyst. There you go. So is there a space, and I know we're talking about assumptions and hypotheses, and I love the idea that hope is not a strategy, but hope and planning make the strategy, and it's what allows people to continue. That's my thought.
Yeah.
I actually wrote a piece a long time ago around people in situations who look for leadership to say, please give us something. But if leader can't hold both of those, and so if you think of a startup founder, CEO can't hold both the operations and the aspiration, Ooh, I like that. Operation, aspiration, hope, and thinking together, you end up with a whole lot of work that people feel nothing for. Your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Yeah, when I first started out, I worked for a company, and we had an idea and sort of like $100,000 of runway. And when I started sort of testing out some of the assumptions that they had about how we could create something, it became real clear to me real quick that the best thing I could do was to work with my team to help them to understand we're sort of looking for a gold, silver, bronze in our testing models. So as we're coming up with basically assumptions of how to move forward, let's sort of use, and at that time I was literally referencing the sort of scientific method as a way to test because it wasn't as popular as it is now. And that helped me to understand and help them to understand why we needed some way to measure what we were doing and to be like be as wild as you want and what you think could happen, but find a way to test it for validation so that we were actually moving stuff forward rather than sort of chasing stuff that was going to end up just causing us headache and heartache, which is a real, how people talk about the head, heart, wallet part of what we do. I think that the head and the heart and the wallet take the biggest hits when you're off on a tangent and there's no sort of validation behind what you're doing. And it
Well, of
becomes
course, there's
really defeating really
validation because
quick.
I know my idea is going to work.
I know I'm right.
So
My mom thinks this is a great idea. And who is she if not the metric?
well, it's so funny because there was one guy who was on a team that Ty and I coached, and he came up to me after his team had made some progress, and he says, "Hey, can I like pick your brain for like a personal project?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" And so he pitched this idea to me. It was so bad, I'm not even going to repeat it. It was just a horrible, horrible idea. But he says, "Yeah, I know it's going to work." I was like, "Oh, great. How do you know?" Well, I just know. I just know that I know this market. It's going to be great. I've talked to people. Okay, how many people? Well, I know people and I've talked to people. And it's like nothing I could say to him
Would dissuade him.
would dissuade him from this is absolutely going to work. And I said, if you truly believe in that, invest your own money. I would recommend a small amount of money, not a lot amount of money.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
Yeah.
If you're
It's
that
hard
sure.
for people.
Yeah.
And it's
Confirmation
heartbreaking.
bias
Like it's
is
genuinely
awful.
so devastating when you think you're on a solid path and you just keep moving it forward. Because truly, there are times when we hear stories of entrepreneurs who are like, no one thought I was right. No one understood my space. And now here I am. But that's such an anomaly by comparison to no one thought I was right. And it turns out I wasn't.
Well, I would suggest to you that those people who do, though, I'm right. Not that they have a sixth sense, but they are cued into something that most of us aren't cued into. So I always go to the I read the book Isaacson's book on jobs, and then the one that has Ashton Kutcher in it. You remember when he goes back to Cupertino and he's flipping the CDs in and out, and he had such observational skills that he was tapped into something other folks weren't tapped into. And he's like, damn it, I keep moving these CDs out. What if? And then you end up, in the scene in the movie, you end up with the iPod, the very first iPod.
Right.
But one thing that John and I used to do, when we would say, you know what? You're right. Absolutely right. You are 100% right. Got a question for you. What must be true? And then get them to break down. So in order for this to happen, this got to happen. This got great. Do you have that evidence for that? Well, no. Now you have some assumptions that you have to burn down. And then we go of those what must be truths. Which one's the most important one? If you don't get that right, none of this makes sense.
Yeah.
That's a good segue into this because must is an important keyword there. I'm a big believer like words mean things, right? Not what could be true, not what maybe should be true, but what must be true. Like what absolutely has to be in place for this idea to catch on. And if you don't have those, to your point, then now you have other things that you need to get data or evidence or traction on in order to grow. Because until you have that data, all you have is an assumption.
And an assumption and $10 will buy you a coffee at Starbucks.
Hey,
Exactly. Maybe.
hey.
There's inflation nowadays.
Yeah. Also, like, I think a lot of entrepreneurs don't realize that they're sort of the new musicians. Like, whatever town you grew up in, think about how many people you knew that were like, I am going to make it. Like, Grammys
Right.
are coming my way. It's just a matter
Yeah.
of time.
Mm.
And there are definitely people that you can think of in the music industry that are those anomalies that no one thought could do it. And my default is always Dolly Parton because I think she's just she's one of my sheroes for sure. But I think she's just one of the biggest sort of trailblazers in that space. And then she moved it into all the other things that she sort of seen as valuable. But it's not often that people become those sort of dynasties inside of their own sort of insular knowledge base. And when you think about how many people now just iterate out and think that they're creating the greatest thing that ever happened, it's like CDs you bought from your friends for $10 that you're like, oh, don't put that in. Don't. I was just supporting them. I'm not actually interested in whatever this music is.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny. So
Adam's chewing on something over there.
Yeah, I am because
He's worried about his old album.
no, I'm worried. I'm worried about disagreeing with Wayne because I think that as much as I love the that and $2 will get you a ride on the subway kind of humor, or that and a nickel will get you a pretzel in the 20s or something. I think as we've seen as early as or as recently as this afternoon, a good assumption where it's an assumption and it's specific and it's articulated, I actually think is incredibly valuable. I think like not even an unknown assumption or like hubris and $10 will get you a ride or now mixing metaphor get you a Starbucks. I was lucky enough to attend my daughter's fourth grade science class the other day, and it was like they did kinetic energy and potential energy, and I feel like there's a lot of potential energy in a clearly articulated hypothesis, and it's very hard actually to even get there. So yeah, as much as I wanted to let it slide, and I also think it sets up the conversation about an assumption versus a hypothesis, and I think it takes a lot of work. I almost think it takes a lot of kinetic energy to even get to the point of a testable hypothesis or even an assumption that is an assumption and you are willing to acknowledge that it isn't true. So that's where I signaled with my face before I could disagree with Wendy's amazing
So
content.
Ty, what happens when you assume?
Well, I'm seeing, I think I'm the elder statesman here. I was old enough to remember the Bad News Bears with Walter Matthau back in 1976 and watching it live. When you make an assumption, you make an ass out of you and me.
Right.
Wait, is this where I finally, when you make an assumption, you get bit by a dog? I've been trying to push that meme out for 2 years. Oh, still, Ty, you watched it.
What did you say?
When you make an assumption, you get bit by a dog.
With the
so good, and nobody asking the right questions, and making bad assumptions, all wrapped up.
Yes,
good meme, and nobody. I don't know. I keep pushing it out. Eventually,
nobody's biting.
Somebody to watch it.
Nobody's biting. That's well done. Well done. It's true.
So speaking of assumptions, I'm curious. I've always been I'm okay with it. I am okay. I think I do a decent job helping people unpack some of these assumptions. But the one thing that I think I always struggle with is, do I get it? Am I being useful in helping people unpack what's an assumption versus an observation versus gas? I mean, literally, I just thought about it. That's not an assumption. That's just a biological reality that you were fighting with. And so I would be curious if we could talk a little bit about how do we get people to what's the right language? What's the right construct, kind of mental construct to help people get to, oh, that's an assumption versus a statement of fact.
Right. And I think that's key. So what I like to define assumptions are those things that we accept to be true without proof. And we tend to do that through our own personal experiences, our heuristics, anything like that we kind of have a gut feeling that it's true, but we're just going on faith that it is true going forward. And so I think to Wendy's point in the beginning is like we have to step back and sometimes realize that what we assume to be true may not be true, and we actually should gather some more evidence to see if that really is true or not. And why? To reduce risk. Ty, you're chewing on that.
I think the part that I'm chewing on is a conversation or an observation that I make that isn't backed by facts, except for people go, but I've seen it. You just talked about it. I know it. I know it. So I can tell you right now, I've talked to people. Well, how many people? I've talked to people, okay, whatever that means. And so how do you separate the idea of I know it, right? Versus I am just
your heart versus your head. As you used to say, Ty,
yeah,
below the neck or above the neck, right? I know it in my gut or I know it with data. Wendy, what would you say to that?
I think about assumptions as being sort of notions, but specifically that we can test, and that becomes fact when we can repeat the test continuously. When it's not just a one-off, or I had this experience when I worked at Intel, and now this is what I think to be true. It's something that you can then take outside of that sort of space and test it repetitively, getting very similar sort of outcomes.
Oh, that's wild, because I don't know if you now I'm gonna get my nerdy out. I haven't read his book, but I know his work and others' works. Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. It's system 1 versus system 2 thinking. And so for those that are listening, system 1 thinking is like just automatic, right? It is gut level. It's below the neck. It's the thing that you use to do repeat ideas. System 2 is more thoughtful. It's more logic. It's more slow. It's more deliberative. And the way John and I would talk about it, system 1 is how you get home and you drive along, you ain't drunk. You drive along and you get home, you're like, I don't know how I got here.
Yeah.
Because you didn't have to think about it. And you assume that everything went well, right? If you're driving, everything, there was no accidents. I didn't cross anybody over because I just don't remember it. Versus, what do you want? You get lost and you're playing the radio. What's the first thing you do? Turn down the radio, because it takes too many resources to find your way around. Like, I don't know where I'm going. Let me turn down the radio. And one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And so I really like that idea of testability and repeatability in a slow, methodical way, which for me gets back to, so what must be true for this to happen? Because what I'm asking people to do is slow your damn brain down a second.
Yeah.
And just work through the problem. I'm assuming that you know what you're talking about. Cool. Knock yourself out.
Show your work.
Yeah, there you go. Show your work. And I think that
how do we know you're not just copying from your neighbor?
There you go.
Exactly.
27. Yeah.
There you go. And so for an entrepreneur to say, I know I'm right, cool. I'm glad you're right. So what must be true for that to happen? And just, I don't need you to, don't have to justify it. Just write it down one step after the other, and then rank them bad boys. And John, the engineer, would say, and there are no ties.
Yep. Priorities can't tie. Make a decision.
That for me, I think is a way to kind of get to, and thank you, Wendy, you were helpful in that slow deliberative, because that brought me to the system 1 versus system 2 thinking. That was useful. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm here for background support, as you recall from the beginning.
So go ahead, John. You were gonna say?
Nope.
So if we got hypotheses, right? I mean, assumptions.
Right.
It's funny because people say, yeah, you're good at hypothesis stuff. And you know what? So confession time. I'm gonna do my best Usher. Here are my confessions from last night. Okay, that's enough. I started out as a chemistry major in college, right? Oh, and by the way, I'll tell this all the time. I flunked out of college because nobody talked, and I hated the school I was going to, although I eventually graduated. But you would think that I have this this really deep library of science in terms of how do you develop a hypothesis. I think I get in trouble sometimes, and I'd love to hear Adam and Wendy, because John knows where I'm at on this. I mean, we've worked together for like 12 years now or something like that. Long
At
time.
least, yeah.
I remember we didn't even have any kids, but that's a whole nother issue. That I think hypotheses, and we've talked about it, that people in the worlds that we deal in are horrible. They might be good scientists, good engineers, but they're horrible at business hypotheses because they want to say it has to have a chi value of this and that. Like, did the shit work or not? All right. And it was this, maybe a little bit, or it's just sucked and we just did something like that. And so, how do you, the two of you, help people develop their hypotheses that they can go out and do something with in terms of their assumptions? I'm just
I think
curious
that
about how you do it.
so I too have gotten in trouble, you know, when you have the chemist or the physicist in the room.
That guy.
I think the scientific method is a good way of framing that you need like peer review and a structure. And but to me, it's only about that smart, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. Like it's so even this afternoon, there were 50 different reasons I called Wendy in, but like one of them, like we literally did this afternoon, and even though we had David Blands, we talk about every week, so we'll get him on soon. We had his templates up, desirability, so like everything was specific, and by the third sticky note, it was still like they are gonna do this. It's like no, every single time you need a human, a date, a number, a reason. Like I believe this number of these people are going to take this action for this reason by this day. Like, and it seems like overkill, but unless you have all those variables, uh, you can't prove it false. I remember someone telling me years ago, and I guess it was a compliment, but it was like there's nowhere to hide in your coaching session. Like it's so either people find it super annoying, but like if you really and I can be human with people where it's like, all right, like let the first couple of sessions let them get away with a non-perfect, you know, like the date's unrealistic or metrics missing. But at the end of the day, if it's not an ultra specific human, you're assuming something that a person, usually a person, you can make a technical assumption, but even technical assumptions have people involved. I mean, there's no products that don't have people involved, and there's no business models that don't have people. So everything still comes back. I guess it's why human-centered design is so. Okay, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. It has to have. I believe this number of this group of people is going to take this specific action by this specific date for this specific reason. I've gone over and over, and it's one thing like maybe no one will copy my does your dog bite videos, but this is the one thing where I'll have on a slide, and it's like with the three of you, I can see them copying every slide with this. They're like, oh, can I see that template again? Like that's the one where they stop on it. Like, all right, that Mad Lib works to me. It's the only, and so when I'm coaching someone, it's the only thing. But even that, I have to break down. Like I could spend 2 hours just on the who, and then it's like, well, and then we talked last week about the date. It's like, well, the date's now locked into 3 weeks unless you want to change it. Okay, now that you have a date and a human, you can come up with a quantity pretty easily. What's the action? Oh, they're gonna buy now. They're gonna click here. Okay, why? So that's my formula.
What would you add, Wendy?
Both work. I think Adam's, we tend to agree a lot on these things, but I think he's right with smart. I think in in David Blaine and Alex Osterwild's book, they have their testing sheets, which are a really good sort of format to follow if you're new to this. And the thing that I would say, sort of between Ty and Adam's input, is that because we try to think of things as being, like really complex because we're such complex individuals, I always tell people keep it simple, right? Like it's KISS and SMART together that help you get to that idea of, because when people start putting numbers to things, I'll talk to 48 people by this time and this date with this stuff, and it becomes quite overwhelming, and they start to realize how they can't get to things, that they overpromise to under deliver on their tests, and then they think my idea is not great, but it's probably just you set up a pretty tricky test for yourself. So I like to just remind people to keep it simple so that they can, again, test it small and then keep iterating it for similar results.
All right, so I got one for both of you. So thank you. And I struggle with this, and I think that the people that I coach, the founders that I coach, also are complexed and perplexed by this. When you get to the achievable and with some measurable amount, if we take the science route, like physics or chemistry, I can write an equation that says if these things happen, something should happen on the back end of this, on the other side of the equal sign, right? I should see some evidence that I'm going in the right direction. So when we say, I think these people will take these, and I know I am right if 25 people pick it up, where the hell does that number come from? Where does that come from? When we put a number against this idea, I think the four of us kind of have a sense of why we want to say that. If it's a 50% or 50% of the people will do this, cool. That's evidence that we're going in the right direction versus what we had. But there are times when I say to people, my founders, make it up, because I'm not exactly sure what you're going to do. Like, I don't know. You have a sense of what you kind of did before, and you've changed a few things. And John, I want you to talk about, if you could, how many things you do in an experiment.
Right. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up, because that's where I was going with you anyway on that journey, because as soon as you start talking about the people that need to take a specific action by a specific time, now we're talking multivariable calculus.
Uh-oh.
Because all of those sliders could be changing at different times.
I can't add. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So we are changing a bunch of things. So here's the metaphor that I use when I teach this stuff is, okay, so you want to make a birthday cake, but you want to tweak it up a little bit and change some things from grandma's recipe. If you change too many ingredients, or the quantity of the ingredients, or how long you cook it, and the cake comes out bad, you don't know which of those changes made the cake bad. It could be some, one, none, or all. And so by fiddling too much with the question that you're trying to solve, you've now actually made it worse, because you can't even go back and repeat that experiment, like Adam was saying. It's not repeatable anymore. And so the way I like to do it, using things like that strategizer test card, or even simpler than that, just make an if-then statement that says, if we do this thing, then we will see this result. All other different flavors of testing cards kind of build on that for a couple of reasons. One, it's an if statement. We're not sure if this happens. It could not happen, which actually implies fallibility, that it could fail. So if you're writing your hypothesis such that you never fail, it's not a hypothesis. If I launch my website, then someone will go to it. Well, of course you're going to go click on it, so you've automatically won. There's no way you can lose. And then again, test one variable at a time if you can. So try to isolate the dependent variable. Just try to isolate what is that one specific thing you're looking for. There's probably a ton of them going through your head, and that usually is the first thing that teams go, well, we don't know. We want to try lots of things. Great. They are all now separate test cards. I want you to fill out separate test cards and change the criteria depending on what are those things you want to test. Well, that's a lot of things I want to test. Exactly. So what do we always say in Agile? Prioritize. Start with the one that's either that you're the least sure about, or will get you your biggest bang for the buck. Like, what will be the biggest impact? Oh man, if they could do this, then that would make a huge leap forward in my learning, my profit, whatever it is that you're trying to advance on. So those are my big stickler points for hypotheses. You're turning that assumption, which is a statement of what we believe to be true, and we're just running with it. Now we're actually turning it into a question that can be tested, like Wendy said, and we have to be careful about which variables we test it, whether we follow the SMART framework, whether we follow a test card, whether that is. Be very specific about that. And like Ty said, if you're not sure where to start, just pick a number to get data. But the second time, you better be a little bit more specific with your numbers. I tell people too, like if I were to say to someone who doesn't run, how fast can you run a mile? You know, I have no clue. I couldn't even tell you a number. I said, pick a number. Like what do you think that number is? If I were to just say, go out and run, what would that number be? And they say, oh, I don't know, 10-minute mile. Okay, great. How are you going to find out? Well, I guess I'm going to have to run a mile, aren't I? I'm like, yes. So then I'll time you. You go out on the track. You get your mile done. Now I have one piece of data. So if I ask you a second time after that, how fast can it take you to run a mile? You better give me an answer a little bit closer to the actual that you got before, instead of the wild guess you had the first time. You're allowed to be wrong once. After that, it's a choice.
I think also we talk about statistical relevance a lot. And so, again, leaning into, I'm not a scientist, but one of the things mine and Adam's colleague, Craig Elias, talks about a lot is that like roughly 27 to 31 is fairly statistically relevant to about 200. And so when you can get data from, 25 to 35 people and then start to evaluate it using your percentages, it gives you something closer to what 200 might look like, which either gives you clearer direction or tells you where you need to start adjusting. So I think that can help entrepreneurs a lot to have something to work towards. Yeah.
It's early evidence of traction. That's what I'm hearing.
So it's interesting you say that, Wendy. Are you familiar with the Norman Nielsen group?
Yeah.
Do you know that? Okay. Do you know they have an equation that says if you look at, you're trying to figure out a feature and you focus on one thing. If four people, when you get to the fifth one, if they all say it, 4 of those 5 people say the same thing, there's a statistical insignificance after that, whether or not you're going to get anything significantly different as a result, which speaks to your 25, 25 to 31 out of 100. It's the same thing. So thank you. That's a new number for me. I appreciate that. That makes me feel better, which also gets to John and Adam, the 100 interviews that in the lean startup methodology, you need to have 100 interviews. Okay. Against how many different things you're asking about.
Right.
Yeah. You all said something that I thought was
my new
go ahead, man.
is that you do need 100 interviews to get to the 5. You need 10 to start, get your confidence, then you need another 10 to get to the right, then you need another 10 to talk to the right same 10 people, then you need another 10 to figure out the pain that you can start doing your interviews, and then you need 50, I guess, or whatever that number was. But all right, go ahead.
No, legit, facts. So I stopped doing chemistry because nobody talked to me, and I had a really bad high school math teacher who, when I got to calculus in college, I was like, I'm done. I have no idea what this person is talking about. I do. Yeah, it was alchemy. It really was. She was writing on the board with her right hand and erasing with her left hand, for all I remember. And that was, well, it was a long time ago. I've been out of high school for 40 years now, right? But it was just, that's what she was doing. Shut up, John. But here's something that I do appreciate about calculus, and this what seemingly is an arbitrary number as you're trying to get people to hone their hypothesis. It is iterative, and so the area under the curve, you're slicing it more and more to get to something that is not perfect, but you're getting you're grounding the truth in experiments, right? Which we don't have in this conversation tonight. We're talking about assumption hypotheses, but I know that Adam and you and Wendy are about where's the experiment, and so I think it's a whole nother conversation with maybe David or the four of us or some combination, but that the experiment is how you narrow the gap between left and right, what I know and what I don't know, that you run these kind of really fast experiments to narrow that gap, to get to something that feels like I'm heading in the right direction. I now know what people want. I got it. And so that was useful how you all frame that, John, and then Wendy and Adam, you framed that for me. I think it's a useful conversation that some founders, I suspect, when they say things like, I have product market fit. How long have you been at this? 6 weeks. Okay. Or I've had one person said, I mean, they've been at it for a long time and they haven't really, they raised, significant 6 figures, and they really haven't done anything on top of them. Like, oh, I have product market fit. I'm like, you do? Yeah, what? Nobody's banging down your door. Nobody's like, yo, you need to get that stuff right now. I need it right now because I'm going out of town and I need this. Like, holy crap. That's all. I'm sorry. That's where I was. You guys will help. I was helpful. Thank you.
If you put
Appreciated.
If you put that experiment card up again. All right, so, well, I don't want to drive. All right, I'll drive. All right, so I want to work through because I think I totally agree with this idea of not testing too many variables at once and being overwhelmed. On the other hand, like when I look at this card, if Ty mentioned the word arbitrary, and I think if you go through the smart variables one at a time and you break them down, nothing's arbitrary. Like we just spent a lot of time talking about how the number, it's a non-zero number. I think there's an analog from Tam, Sam, and Soam where it's like, it's not zero. It's not, if it's like B to C, it's probably somewhere, between 100 and 1,000. If it's B to B, it's probably somewhere like 5. All right. So there's some quantity that is just knowingly obvious, especially if you have a coach. We spent the whole week last week, John, you even committed to it, where we always say it depends. We actually finished the show by saying, what's the right time? And it was like, you gave an answer. You were like, what was your answer? It was like 3 weeks is
exactly
too long, right?
One sprint.
So I'm looking at this card and it's like, we believe that people are willing to pay. Like which people? Like if you shouldn't
Right.
Grandma's cake, fine. I'm the biggest believer that you can't have change random shit, but like people should be a customer segment that that you're not changing every week. Maybe there's 2 different sides of a market. Maybe you have different stakeholders. Maybe you have partners that you have assumptions about. But at the end of the day, you only have 2 or 3 or 4 main stakeholders. So I believe which people are willing to pay $500? Okay, good. Are willing to do something for some reason to verify that. That's the experiment. I actually think of all the things that we talk about and go around and not round in circles in a good way and pulling apart. On MVP Mondays, like they take out David and Alex's book. There's 40 experiments. 40 experiments, 100% of the time, or 95% of the time, you can point to one of those 40 experiments and it's good enough to test the thing. What's still in government, in late stage startups, in first idea, but what is still hard is this smart hypothesis piece. Once you get to a hypothesis, yeah, there's 20, 30, 40 ways you can test it. But this, like, I agree with you, like, there's too many things, but then as soon as you make it, and I love the if then, I think keep it simple, stupid. I think if we start there, if we build it, they will come. Okay, but fine. But if you build it by when? If I just let someone off the hook, and this is where it goes back to there's nowhere to hide, fine. But like, how long are you going to spend building it? How much are you going to spend building it? Who's going to come? Okay, when are they going to come? Why are they going to come? Like, I don't know that you need to say, like, to me, keep it simple and non-conflating variables is not an excuse. I don't know. I think it's a tough, which is why this is so hard. But yeah, I think that card you just showed can be simplified a little bit in the sense that the experiment is totally different from the hypothesis, right? So like you can pull that, we'll verify this by doing, I don't think you need that in the card. And I also think the metric is implicit in that top statement. So so go back to one last time and then I'll give up the mic to verify this, we will I just take that whole thing out. Like, can you articulate an assumption before you even rank it? The metric, is implicit. So this many people will pay this much money is you don't need the redundancy of what you're measuring, right? So it's all in one statement. I stand by my original. All right, I'm out.
So to your point, having a prudent window of variables that could fit within that range is actually kind of that sweet spot between the art and the science, right? That is, again, that's where it really gets fun to coach teams, and to really help them think through that. I know that like Tristan Kromer over in the Chromatic team, he likes to use like the Fermi estimates, like Fermi problems. Like, if you said how many fish are in the ocean, like there's a systematic way that you can think through it, and actually get close enough to start. And that's really helpful to do things with teams. So if they're like, well, I don't know, if I launch my website, is 100 people okay? Or is 5 people okay? They're like, okay. Without even like going out and doing market research, other people in your industry, what do you think that their website hits are per day? Well, it's probably about this. Okay. So do you think you're going to get that? Maybe not quite that, but I think based off of some other data that I have and similar networks, I think if I launched, I could get somewhere between, like half of that. Okay. You're highly confident in that? Yeah. And that's a whole other methodology of how to determine confidence levels. But yeah, you start having those conversations and you can help them think through a window to test, right? And so that helps you kind of determine that cutoff point. So that way it's a valuable test that gives you some data you can make a decision off of, instead of just, well, we tried that, it didn't work. Let's try the other cold spaghetti that we're going to throw on the wall now.
I think also being able to test quickly, like not to your point of like 3 weeks, like not setting things up so that you don't know until 3 months from now whether you're on the right path or just wandering aimlessly. So having quick testing, and I also often encourage people to run, especially because there's so many simple ways to test basic things, like run 5 ads, put $20 behind
not?
each of them, see which one does better, then put more into that, right? It's just trying to get to what's giving you more confidence. And I think that confidence concept is sort of from the scientific perspective as well as like you as an entrepreneur and what you're trying to pursue and what you're going after. Once you start to develop that confidence in your idea and in yourself, it becomes a lot easier to start really digging into tests that help with what are truly your riskiest assumptions, because you become more aware of where your gaps are as you're sort of skirting around the risk and trying to get something validated out. And so I like the idea of just quick successive iteration and doing your tests quickly so that you're not wasting time and effort.
You missed it last week. We talked about, I know, John, I know we're at the 45, but you missed it last week. We talked about, listen, yeah, I know. Stop it, John. We talked
I'm
about,
proud of you.
I'm there. I see the number. So we talked about how these quick experiments in terms of MVPs, we were talking about MVPs, and that what you were trying to do is actually, or it was that one, it was about learning, that you're trying to reach, the thing was about learning. You're trying to reduce the economics of learning. And so if it's too long of a time, I love this idea of confidence over resource, and resource is time, talent, or treasure. And so how do you reduce the economic burden of doing that? And the only way that you can do that is reduce the amount of the speed at which you are testing either your assumptions or your hypotheses, right? So what do I need to do to learn as much as I can? So throwing $100 at 5 ads, if you're in a consumer space, to figure out whether or not this ad hits for the very same thing. You haven't changed the product. You're just putting it out there. You've reduced the amount and speed at which you learn about about how the market is taking in your idea from a 3-week process to a couple of $100 in 5 days, $100 in 5 days. You've reduced that. And I think that if we could, as coaches, get people to understand that this isn't about your idea. It isn't about your thing. It's about the market's acceptance of your thing. And how do you get people there as quickly and as efficiently as possible? Because I think confidence over dollars is about efficiency of learning, right? How do we create efficiencies in learning? Okay, I'm done.
Economic time loops. That's what you called them last week. And I loved it. Economic time loops.
So that's what you get when you get an ENFP among people. I just come straight out and I have no idea what I just said. It just comes out of my mouth.
Ty, I'm the converge to your diverge.
Exactly.
Happy Valentine's Day. All right, let's go to final thoughts. We'll start with our special guest. Wendy, what are your final thoughts on assumptions versus hypotheses?
I think, again, just repeating as quickly and effectively as you can to try to get similar results will give you a lot more sort of confidence in what you're assuming to be right and get you closer to being able to validate out your hypothesis, which is really the essential part for most entrepreneurs.
Nailed it. Love it. All right. Let's go to Adam. Final thoughts.
Specificity.
Wow. Even in your final statement, you had specificity.
Brevity.
Yeah.
Well, but then, okay. So last week, didn't I convince you?
Oh, you seem to be cutting out. Sorry, Adam. I don't know what's something wrong with your mic there.
Did you mute me?
I did.
That's amazing.
The power is so great.
Did I convince you to play Silicon Valley at the end of last week's episode, or did we do that in the after? Did we do that after?
We did that in the after party.
I have nothing further, Your Honor.
As long as I yield the mic. Ty, final thoughts.
Assumptions are powerful because they get what's in your brain out so the world can hear it. Hypotheses are you understanding what must be true and running an experiment around that.
Boom. Took the words almost out of my mouth. So yeah, there's not much I could add to that in the sense that assumptions are good for declaring your biases, declaring your heuristics, declaring these things that we navigate the world in, and starting to unpack those and turning those into things that we can actually test one variable at a time, or as close to as few variables as possible, so that you can get some actionable data to learn the next thing or improve. So that's the goal. Iterate fast, like Wendy said. Just shrink those economic time loops of testing and get that learning ratio much higher, and then you'll be okay. So I'm a firm believer in that. And do us a favor, check out the YouTube channel. Just do a little subscribe there, follow that, so that way we get a little boosted in the algorithm. youtube.com/@whatpaves. So that's been awesome. You guys have been great. Wendy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on, and we will see you next week. Good night.
Thank you, Wendy. Bye.
Thank you guys.